My name is Jon Romano, and I want to share with you what led me to commit a school shooting, but more importantly, I want to talk about how we can prevent somebody else from doing the same thing. Now, I'm sharing this because I believe the best way that we can help prevent something is by understanding what led up to it in the first place. Now, there's no excuse for what I or so many other people have done. There's no justification. Nothing I'm going to share with you will ever make you think that makes sense. It never will. But I hope to put some pieces of the puzzle together for you so that you can have that understanding that will lead to hopefully the prevention of somebody carrying out an attack like I did or anything else. Because most people who suffer, they might not ever think about hurting anybody else. But we also want to prevent those who are suffering in silence from going through what they are. Now, my early childhood, a lot of people ask me about that. And from the outside looking in, I played plenty of sports. I loved Little League. I was a pitcher and I absolutely loved it. I did that from the time I was like 6 until I was 12. But I also had plenty of friends when I was little. I had good grades. But what people didn't see was, well, my father left when I was 4, as so many people experience. But he was that type that didn't even want the visitation rights in the beginning. He didn't want anything to do with me or my family. He just left. And then also at 5 years old, maybe 6, I was groomed by somebody in my family, and I was sexually abused for probably about 2 years. And I bring this up because I never talked about it until I was already in prison. Again, obviously this isn't justification for what I did. It has nothing to do with what I did, but this was something that I struggled with for a long time because obviously at 5, 6 years old, I didn't know what was happening to me. I thought this was what people in love did. And when this person stopped, I believed that I had done something wrong. I believed that once again, I was not lovable, that somebody was basically leaving me after telling me that they loved me and wanted to be there for me. But as I got older, this became more of a problem. When I was about 12, 13, and I started to become a little bit more aware of sex and everything, I began to look back and realize the horrors of what had happened to me, what I'd been through. But I also carried a sense of guilt and shame where I believe I had done something wrong. I believed that I had done something disgusting. And I believed that if people knew this secret about me, if they knew what I had done, I believed my family, my friends who were there for me would not be there for me anymore. They would not accept me anymore. They would not want to be my friend. They would not want to be close to me, that they would think that I was disgusting. And I carried that shame, as too many people in our world do. And I think that there was a lot of different things that started to come together for my depression that really started to evolve. And it wasn't so much that I had a bad life. I knew that in many ways I was privileged. I had family on my mother's side who was caring and supportive. I had friends. I tell people, I remember at 15 years old, kind of living the ultimate 15-year-old boy's dream. I'm sitting in my living room with about like 8 or 9 friends, hanging out, having a good time, beautiful girlfriend sitting on the couch next to me. But you know what? Depression made me feel like I was completely and totally alone. Not because I thought that they didn't like me, but because I thought, nobody could ever really like me, that there was something innately wrong with me. And I struggled with that even in that moment. I struggled to the point where I quit playing sports at 13. My grades started to slip. I was never an A student, but I had mostly B's and some A's. And then suddenly I started to get C's, D's, and even F's. and I was skipping class. I still remember the first drink I had of alcohol. It was at a friend's house, you know, sleepover. I can't remember if I was 12 or 13, but you know, middle of the night, parents are sleeping. Me and a couple of the boys were sneaking his dad's beers and drinking. Um, and yeah, I would begin to drink more, you know, with friends. And as time went on, I drank alone sometimes too. The same with smoking cigarettes, turned into smoking weed, you know, and it all starts off with socially, right? Doing it with friends just to have a good time. But eventually I would start to do it sometimes to numb my own pain. And that's something that I never really looked upon again until I was in prison, until it was too late, until I had already caused so much pain and trauma for so many other people. But I did ask for help. I did come out, you know, and I remember one day I was in school, ninth grade, I think, and, or no, take that back, 10th grade. I called my mom from my phone and I said, I can't do this anymore. There's something wrong with me. I don't feel right and I can't make it through another day. I just can't. And my mom did what she could for me. She came, she picked me up, and she made an appointment to see my doctor. And we got in the next day. And, you know, he started to ask me questions about, have you ever thought about hurting yourself? And I said, yes. And he asked, have you ever thought about killing yourself? And I said, yes. And my mom was in the room. So this was me admitting to the doctor all these things, and my mom hearing it for the first time that I was suicidal. And I was 15 years old, thinking that my life was no longer worth living. And so my doctor, he gives us a referral for a good psychologist, and I start to see a psychologist, I start to see a psychiatrist. And by the way, my general physician, he had also given me a subscription or prescription right there for, you know, for antidepressants. And yeah, that starts the medication, right? Medication can help and does help many people. And I think it helped me to a certain degree. But I also realize looking back that at 15 years old, they start me off on these SSRIs, and then I start complaining about different side effects. And then I'm given other medications for those side effects. And the next thing you know, I'm not only on antidepressants, I'm on something for anxiety and sleep. And I got tired of it all and I tried to end my life. And I didn't tell anybody for a while, but then I also started to cut myself. And yeah, a teacher at school noticed the cuts and, you know, brought attention to it, called my mom, made everybody aware of what she had noticed underneath my long sleeves. And my mom would ask me if I would be willing to go to a mental hospital to get some intensive care for a couple of days. And I said yes. And I went to Four Winds, which is a local mental hospital, and I was 15 years old. This was in 2003. In fact, I remember while I was there, that's when we were watching the news when we first started to invade Iraq. And I believe it was March 2003. But while I was there also, I was a juvenile, right? And so the state mandated that I had to participate in classwork for school, and I had to continue on with my studies and to stay up to date. But this is where the grievance begins. This is where the problems with my high school begin. Because while I was in there, they didn't send any of my classwork, you know, and the hospital, they said, you have to go into the classroom, and there's a dozen, 15 other kids my age who are there as patients, and they're all doing their classwork. They're all from the area, but I was the only one that was attending Columbia High School, and I was the only one sitting there with no work to do day after day. And the administration kept telling me, I'm sorry, we don't know what's happening. We're trying to call them. We're, you know, faxing them. We're not getting any response. We don't know what's happening. they won't send anything over for you. And in my mind, I started to believe, even when I tried to kill myself, they don't care about me. And it was an eye-opening event in a very horrible way, because then I started to harbor resentment towards them, and I started to be angry. Again, this doesn't justify what I did. There's so many people who have gone through so much worse, but this is what started to go on in my mind. And when I got out of the hospital and I was back at the school, we started to fight to get me an IEP, an individual education plan, where I would be able to, get a little bit of extra help, be able to change my coursework around a little bit. But the school said no. Even with my psychiatrist, my psychologist, my mom, and even one or two of my teachers fighting for me to get an IEP, fighting for me to get the help that I needed, the school said no. And this again sat in my mind as they don't care about me. They don't want to help me, even with this small thing. Again, they don't care about me. They would even tell me and my mom, why don't you try homeschooling? If you don't like what we're doing for you here, stay at home and do homeschooling. So I did. But for anybody who knows, what it's like to be depressed or how to handle somebody who is depressed, I was now isolated more so than ever before. And, I didn't see my friends Monday through Friday like I normally would. I wasn't a part of all the things going on at school like I normally was. And this was before social media. This was like the days of AOL Instant Messenger. So, chat rooms and, a little bit of texting, but I felt like I was separated and isolated, and I became more depressed. And I told my mom and my psychologist and everybody this pretty quickly. And they realized that homeschooling obviously was the worst thing for me at that time, and I returned to school. And this time my mom actually hired an attorney to fight for me to get an IEP. And suddenly when the attorney showed up to the meeting and the attorney was telling the administration of the school, well, you're going to face a lawsuit and bad publicity. And now suddenly the school was willing to give me an IEP and to help out in any way that they possibly could. So again, this is forced. This is not them wanting to help me. This is them feeling like they have to help me. And it just felt hollow. And it was May. And the school year was pretty much over. And I had failed almost everything. And in my mind, I blamed the administration. Yeah, there's a lot more I could have done. I definitely could have asked some of my friends for tutoring more. I could have done a lot more advocating for myself. But, I had friends and family who were advocating for me, and I just didn't have it in me. And I gave up, and I failed everything, except for gym and English. But, then as summer happens and, I'm interacting with friends still, I'm still dating, still out there and being social. And, we're getting to like 6 months before the shooting. Things seem fine. And as I start up the new school year, I'm thinking, all right, new school year. Yeah, I have to repeat a lot of things, but this time things are going to be better. And they weren't. And I was turning 16 in October when, my psychologist said, well, when you're 16, you can drop out and you can find other ways to continue your education. And so we started to look into that, where I would drop out when I turned 16 and I would continue my education through the local community college. They had a continuing education plan or program. And I tested in and I passed, just barely, but I passed to where they accepted me. And it was set up that I would start community college in January of 2004. Mind you, the shooting happens in February. And in my mind, I'm now thinking like, great, I'll be taking college courses, I'll be getting college credits. And I think it was like once I got a certain number of credits, 24 credits, I'd be given my GED, and all those college credits would count towards my associates. So I'm thinking, great. I'm thinking I'm actually now ahead of my friends. And I start to have like this hope for the future. And I started to have this improvement where I leave the high school behind, and I start to come off the medications, and, they just leave me on Xanax for anxiety. And yeah, I start planning for the future for the first time in a while. It seemed like I was happy. And I tell people though, it was all just, I threw a rug on a hole in the floor and thought it would be better. It looked nice, but I never really dealt with a lot of the serious issues. I never really opened up to my therapist, my psychiatrist. I never told them just how suicidal I was. I never told them just how angry at the world I was. I never told them a lot of things. And if there's anything I could tell my 16-year-old self, I wish I could go back and tell myself to be open, to be honest, and to be vulnerable. That's what I wish I could tell myself, because that's what I wish I had been. And I wish I had dealt with these issues, and I wish I had dealt with everything instead of eventually spreading my pain and suffering to other people. Because obviously things did not work out. When I started to go to the community college, it it felt good at first, but then I fell out of place. And I think it might have been more in my head than anything else, but I felt like that gap between 16 and most of the other students are at least 18, 19 years old. I try to fit in, I try to talk to people, but I'm also more self-conscious than ever before. I'm struggling with it. And this also begins another sense of social isolation, where I had friends, but they were in high school, and here I was in a community college struggling uh, to fit in. And again, it was more in my mind than anything else, because I would talk to people, but I just, there was that voice in the back of my head that was like, nah, this isn't the place for you. They don't see you as one of them, you know? Um, but I didn't want to admit any of this to anybody. I didn't want to be vulnerable. And I didn't want to admit to people that I wasn't doing as good as they thought I was. I didn't want to, you know, when people were giving me kind of that like pat on the back of like, we're proud of you, you came through this, you've been doing so great. I didn't want to turn to them and say, I'm not doing so great sometimes. Sometimes I'm still really struggling. I can't sleep at night, and I'm really having a hard time. And I wasn't telling anybody that. I was just putting on a smile and grinding through it. But also, I look back at a lot of the pictures from this time, and I thought I was putting on a mask. I thought I was putting on a smile. I see some pictures where I look happy, but I see a lot of pictures where I look miserable. And so the real downward spiral begins when um, one of my older brothers, uh, he had been in the army, and he had been over in Iraq and Afghanistan, but he was finishing up, and he started to talk to me about going hunting. And, you know, I had been to the firing range, once or twice with my other brother. He had a couple of guns. We used to go shooting. Um, but I'd never been hunting before, and I was really excited about this. My mom obviously was very against guns, especially being in the house. especially with everything that I'd been through. I mean, she had had guns, in the house before. Her first husband was in the military as well. Um, but now she was obviously worried, and with good reason. But I would go to my therapist and talk to him about it, and he would bring my mom in at the end of the therapy session for the last 5 minutes each time to kind of talk about things. And this time he said, and we still remember these exact words. He tells my mom, "You have your son back." And it was like the weight was lifted off of my mom's shoulders. She now felt like, this was all just that terrible bump in the road where she no longer had to worry about me, where she didn't have to fear coming home and finding me dead. And yeah, so from there, she would start talking to some of her coworkers who were hunters, and she said that she wanted to get a shotgun. She wanted to go skeet shooting like she used to do when she was younger with her first husband, and to have the shotgun for self-defense, obviously, in the house. Then I could obviously use it while I'm hunting with my brother. And, you know, I remember one day she comes to me and she says, "Hey, the local gun store is going out of business. We should go and check it out." They had the giant banner out front with sales and everything. So she said, "Why not, take advantage of their going out of business sale?" And, when we went over there, she had already spoken with the local police department because she wanted to ask them. She was like, "Hey, um, I'm thinking about buying a rifle or a shotgun. I have a 16-year-old son in the house. Do I need to have any special permits? Is there anything I should know? What are the local laws?" And the police just kind of like, "Just keep it locked up. You should be okay." Like, they said, actually, the guys down at the gun store might know more than us. So when we were at the gun store, my mom had that conversation, and obviously, she would go on to buy a shotgun, and, she would go on to buy a lock for it. But this is the problem when, I think a lot of kids, like I was, will always try to, when something is locked up, to find out how to get at it. I've heard a lot of stories from people where they would find an index card with a combination for the gun safe, or in my case, I just kept looking until I found the key. I knew that it was a different and distinct key. It was a smaller key, and I just looked for it until I found it. And my mom did everything she could to be a responsible gun owner, but this is something, unfortunately, that happens too often. I found out how to get access to that. But in my mind, initially, I'm just kind of happy. I take a couple of pictures. I hate this one picture. It's the one that I use in my presentations. Um, this picture, I'm just showing the gun off. I'm just a teenager. I'm not thinking anything horrible at this point. I'm just thinking, you know what? Uh, I'm, I'm proud. I'm kind of happy. This is really cool. It's also kind of like, you know, um, the gun was kind of like a symbol of trust that I would obviously, destroy that symbol. Um, but that's what it was in my mind. I felt trusted. I felt believed in. I felt like, all right, things are moving forward. But obviously, I'm taking these pictures, and I start sending them to people, kind of showing off. And that's when obviously my friends and family, some of them still had a lot of reservations, and they shared that with me because they cared about me and they loved me, and they wanted me to know that, and they wanted me to know that they wanted me to be safe. But in my mind, I start to see this as, "Oh, you don't trust me. You don't believe in me. You you will never believe in me. You will never trust me. Nobody ever will. Nobody's ever going to believe in me again." And it was like I stepped on that rug I threw over the hole in the floor, and I fell through hard. Because now I start to believe there is no hope. Now I'm in the abyss, not just the darkness, but the abyss. And some of you know what I'm talking about. You believe that there was never any real happiness in your life, that it was all just a lie, and that you will never ever feel happiness again. There will be nothing but the darkness. And that's what I started to tell myself. And that's what I started to believe. And that's when I started to get not just suicidal, but I began to be angry as well, because I started to believe this isn't my fault. This is their fault. I asked for help and they turned me away time after time. And I wanted to blame somebody else other than myself. And for a brief moment, did I think about staying home and just ending my life? Yeah. But I didn't want my mom to find my body. I didn't want my mom to associate the house with my death. I just didn't want her to feel so much pain and suffering. And that's when I knew I wanted the people at the school to feel that pain and suffering. I wanted them to know that they had ignored me and that now they would not be able to. And now they would not be able to push me away. And now they would have to be remembering me forever. And I hate that that's what my thought was, but that's what it was. And this goes literally Saturday night. I'm out with friends. I'm having a good time. And Sunday, it's like everything just flips around. And I can't believe how quick it just flipped around. Like I said, I had managed to make everything look good to an extent. Because looking back, there's a lot of pictures of me and I was miserable. But I had just thrown that rug over a hole in the floor and I stepped in it. And I literally, like I said, I went from Saturday night, I'm out with friends having a good time, to Sunday night, I'm writing a suicide note and I'm getting ready to die the next day in my school. And that's how things started. That's how it all got set up in my mind of, I want the school to feel my pain. I want the people who ignored me to be forced to see me, to see my pain, and to feel it for the rest of their lives. And again, I hate myself for it, but that's the thought process. So on February 9th, 2004, when I was 16 years old, I'd written out most of my suicide note the night before, saying goodbye to family and friends, expressing some anger towards a few people, but I said nothing about wanting to shoot or kill anybody, because that wasn't my intent. I knew that I could traumatize and terrorize people by showing up. I thought about shooting out windows as I'm entering. I thought about just making this big fucking spectacle. And, I hate to fucking say it. I wanted to go out with a bang. I wanted to go out with, just all that drama. I wanted the police. I wanted the SWAT. I wanted them to show up and I wanted there to be chaos and I wanted them to kill me. And so I walked into my high school with my backpack on and the shotgun in its case, because I knew that the case was this black, case that if anybody saw me with it, they would think that it's an instrument or school equipment, Nobody's gonna see it and think there's a fucking gun in there. So I drove myself in late, and I hadn't even been going there for the past couple months, but I knew I'd just blend in. And I walked right in. And I walked up to a second floor, and I went into a bathroom, and I went and I sat in the stall. And I took the shotgun out, and I'm sitting there with it in my hands. But now I'm starting to freak out a little bit. Now I'm starting to think, I don't want to be here. I just want to go home. But I start believing that this is the point of no return. I'm here. I can't back out now. And I even sent a couple of texts. I sent, I called one of my friends, but this is, early 2004. Cell phones, especially in schools, weren't as big as they are now. So I sent out a couple of texts, made a few phone calls, nobody picked up. I could have called my mom though. I could have called my therapist. I could have called 911. I could have done so much, but I wasn't willing. I kind of wanted a friend to help me out in that moment because I believed that they would also, I wouldn't face any consequences, that they would just, help me cover up this horrible thing or talk me out of it, and it would never be, out there for my mom or for anybody else to know about. But instead, I would sit there for 40 minutes, and I would hear the bell ring as one period ends, and the hallways fill up with students, and I'm sitting in this bathroom as boys are now coming in, not realizing I'm sitting in this stall, and I'm sitting there with a shotgun in my hands, and I remember their conversations. I remember too much of it, as I'm sure all of them remember this. But as the time in between periods starts to come to an end, I hear as everybody's leaving and the hallway starts to empty out, and I hear the next bell go off, and I know that this is it. And I send a final text message to a few of my friends saying, "In school with gun, get out." And I sent this because I didn't want their last memory to be of me with the gun. I didn't want them to experience the terror and have the trauma that everybody who would see me would experience. I wanted them to escape that. I wanted to protect them from that. And as I grab the gun and leave the stall, I start to come out of the bathroom, and there's one of those little privacy hallway sections, and I'm literally shotgun in my hands, down at my hips, barrel is aimed forward as the student, he starts to come into the bathroom having no idea what he's about to see, and he literally freezes in front of me, 3, 4, maybe 5 feet in front of me, and he sees me there with the shotgun in my hands, pointed right at him. And he freezes saying, "This can't be real." And he turns around and he runs. And I come out of the bathroom. I come around the corner and I see 2 other students as they're coming around the far corner at the other end of the hallway. One of them, seeing me, he yells out, "Oh shit." And I remember there was a teacher in one of the classrooms. Now, they don't see me, they don't know what's going on. To them, it is any other day. And I remember this teacher calling out to him, "Watch your mouth," because she doesn't know what's happening. And those 2 students, they start to run back around the corner as I fire off 2 shots up and away from them. In their minds, they thought they were about to die. In their minds, they were just barely escaping death. And I know that 20 years later, they still see me, they still remember me, and they still feel that pain, that fear, that anxiety. And I robbed them and so many other people of the life they should have had. Obviously, they're still living life, but not as they should have. But they disappear around that far corner, like 40 feet away from me, and now I fired off 2 shots. Now the people in this area of the school know that something horrible is happening. And now I'm walking down the hallway, shotgun still down on my hips, and I'm just walking. I see that there's doors that are closed. I don't try to open them, I don't touch them, but I remember there was this one classroom door that was wide open, and it just drew me to it, and I just walk over there. I think because I just wanted that moment of people seeing me, of seeing my pain, seeing my suffering, but instead, I just saw their pain and their suffering that I was causing them at that moment. And there's no sense of revenge. There's no sense of relief. There's no sense of anything but fucking despair. And there's no sense of anything but emptiness in that moment for me. And the teacher, she's at the front of the class and she's underneath this table in the middle in front of the chalkboard, and she's crying out, "Oh Lord," because I'm her fucking nightmare. I'm everybody's fucking nightmare. And there's even this one girl who pops her head up because they're all down on the ground. They're all hiding from me behind their desk. And there's this one girl, she pokes her head up above the desk and she just looks at me with her eyes, they're just filled with confusion and terror. She's one of the people I was just out with on Saturday. She wasn't like one of my friends, but she was a friend of a friend. And like I said, Saturday, we're out, we're having a good time. And I'm sorry for what I did to them. I can never take it back. I can never undo the pain, the suffering that they went through and that everybody else went through. But yeah, I stood there in the doorway and I just walked out. I turned around and I walked out. I didn't feel anything at that point. I was just ready to die. And I remember walking back down the hallway in the direction that I had just come from. And I can still kind of picture the corner of the hallway. I wasn't really thinking it, but I just had that feeling that this is where I'm going to die at. Part of me thought that I'd be able to, finally now maybe pull the trigger on myself. But I knew that the police were just moments away from showing up. And I knew that they would be ready to kill me. And I wanted that. I was at peace with that. I don't even want to say at peace, but I accepted it. But instead, I didn't know that the vice principal, one of the vice principals, hearing the gunshots, he didn't think that they were gunshots. A lot of people who heard them in the distance, they came up with different ideas of what it might have been. A student, slamming a desk against the wall or it's something. Nobody's thinking gunshots. But so he comes to investigate, and as I'm walking down the hall, he's actually coming around the corner behind me. And he sees me and he sees the gun as I'm walking away in my hands, and he runs up behind me, and he would reach around, and I'm a big guy, but so is he. And he grabs the barrel with one hand, and around the other side, he's grabbing at the stock, and he just starts to like squeeze me in between himself and the gun. And of course, I'm caught off guard. I start to try to like push the gun out. I start to try to like, do everything I can to get this guy off my back as we're standing there. And I start to like shake back and forth, and my finger is on the trigger. And as I'm like shaking back and forth, that's when the gun goes off. I didn't know that there was a teacher coming up behind us to help. And I didn't know that I just shot somebody. Because he was hitting the leg. And I didn't know I just shot somebody. But eventually I couldn't get control of the gun back, and I finally just let go of the gun. And I remember putting my hands up and just saying, fine, I give up. Those were the only words I spoke during that whole time. Fine, I give up. And I just felt so defeated, just felt deflated. I felt nothing but that emptiness. And that abyss that I'd been in before, that I was trying to escape. I was just further into the abyss than ever before, feeling worse than ever before. Now, eventually the police would show up, and I'd be arrested, and I would spend 17 years in prison for what I did. None of that changes what I did. None of what I do today changes what I did. None of what I do or will ever do will take away that pain and suffering that was spread upon so many innocent people that didn't deserve it, and their friends, their family, my community as a whole. Students who go to that high school now 20 years later, I've had some reach out to me through social media, and, there's forever that dark cloud over that school because of me, because of what I did. And at the time, I wanted that. And I hate myself for it. But although I can never take away what I did, I can never truly make up for what I did. There is no making up for it. There is no redemption. People keep using that fucking word, and I hate it. There is no redemption. There is only helping people so we can prevent this from happening again anywhere else, as it has happened time and time again. I spent 17 years in prison only to watch as school shootings became worse and more prevalent than ever. So when I came home, I've been home for a few months, when actually my parole officer calls me and she says, hey, there's a deputy up in Saratoga looking for you. And I said, I haven't been to Saratoga. I don't know what you're talking about. I ain't do anything. And she says, no, he hears that you want to help out, that you want to try to do something good to help the school. He was a school resource officer. And I said, oh yeah, no, I would love to. And so she gave him my phone number, and he would call me, and we would end up meeting up and talking, and I shared a bit with him, and I shared my hope to do something positive and to help prevent these things from happening again. And he said, we got this school safety conference coming up. We would love for you to speak at it. We would love for you to share your story. And I did. I was able to do that. I'd been home for about a year, and I was able to stand in front of hundreds of police officers, school officials, and I didn't even fucking know until the day before, but the media was there. And I opened up and I shared with them a bit about what I just shared with you. And it was terrifying for me to be open, to be honest, and to be vulnerable. But I felt so much better after getting it all out in front of so many people who would be able to use that information for good. You know, I would later find out that one of the police officers who was there was actually somebody who had been a student at my high school during the shooting. And apparently, you know, she was up in the air about how she felt about going and watching me speak. But, uh, you know, somebody sent me a screenshot from a Facebook post she had done saying that, you know, she really came away feeling better. She didn't know how to feel at first, but she felt better afterwards. And, you know, again, she and so many others had experienced that pain and that suffering for years. But, you know, here I was 18 years later, you know, maybe able to give her some answers and a little bit of understanding and a little bit of closure. But more importantly, I gave her and all those people there some insight into, you know, what leads somebody to do such a horrible thing. And then sure enough, you know, the FBI would end up hearing about the fact that I'd spoken at this conference, and they have the behavioral analysis unit. You know, those are the people in the FBI who do psychological profiling of different types of criminals. And so they were interested in talking with me. They wanted to interview me. And so they sent two special agents to come and spend 2 days interviewing me. And, you know, after we did that, they said, hey, you know, we might be able to use you in the future. We might want you to speak at other conferences to help out other law enforcement officers, to help out other people who are doing the work to prevent these shootings from happening. Your story, your insight could really go far. It could really help a lot of people. And, you know, I was blessed to hear that. I was blessed to be able to, you know, to share with them, and I've gone on to share my story around the country a few times with law enforcement, school officials, mental health specialists, and I've learned a lot of things. In fact, you know, I want to share a couple of things with you, obviously, about how to prevent these tragedies from happening. I first want to introduce you to what the FBI and other law enforcement specialists call the pathway to violence. Now, the pathway to violence is the stages that they have identified in a shooter or somebody who's planning out some type of targeted attack. That might be with a gun, with a bomb, with a knife, with anything. But in their minds, there are these stages that they have identified and kind of classified where people can be on the lookout. Now, obviously, it starts off with a grievance, right? It starts off with somebody being upset with a person, a group of people, a institution, a place, whatever that might be. And for me, I started with that grievance at my school and with school officials, you know, when I started to feel rejected after I was hospitalized and after I was requesting an IEP. I felt rejected. I felt that they didn't care about me. And that started in my mind a huge grievance towards them. Again, that doesn't justify what I would go on to do, but that was my mindset. That was what was going on in my head, you know, and I was upset. I was angry. I was depressed. And, you know, I was frustrated, and I would vent that to people, you know, but a lot of people, they just kind of, you know, a lot of kids hate school and have issues with their schools. But the next step in the pathway to violence is violent ideation. And this is when somebody might start, you know, joking around about violence towards a person, a group of people, or an institution, or, you know, somebody might even be doing writings or drawings, showing some of these thoughts. This is what the FBI calls leakage. This is when somebody is basically letting out some of their internal thoughts. They're putting it out there externally so that people might, you know, see what's going on. And these are the red flags where if you see somebody, you know, who is writing about this, drawing about this, you know, having a lot of like uh, um, empathy and connection and, idolizing mass shooters or terrorists, when somebody starts to kind of have that mental connection with them, you know, that's a red flag, obviously. That's a warning sign that there's something going on. Now, maybe this person might never go down the pathway to violence and carry out an attack, but it's definitely a red flag that they're suffering, you know? The next step is research and planning, though. Now, this is where somebody might be doing some type of research, where they might be looking into previous attacks, whether it's school shootings or, anywhere else. This is when somebody is starting to think about, what other people have done and how they can do it themselves. Now, this is also difficult sometimes when you're dealing with students who are at a school. They're obviously at the school all the time. They already know the layout for the most part. They already have an idea of if there's security and what it's like. Um, but, you still have to be on the lookout when somebody is doing a lot more research, when somebody is looking into previous attacks. That's a warning flag, a warning sign, excuse me. Um, and it's all about when somebody has changed from their norm. If somebody's always kind of had, a general inquisitiveness about, true crime is very popular nowadays, but if somebody suddenly out of nowhere seems to be depressed, seems to be angry, and now they're doing this research into others, we want to be mindful of that, obviously. Um, but the next step in the pathway to violence is when somebody is preparing. When somebody's going into that preparation mode, they're making sure that they have weapons, that they have ammunition, they're making sure that they have maybe tactical gear. We have seen that become very popular with, the vests and the different types of clothing that school shooters identify with. If you see somebody buying this stuff up, yeah, a lot of people might be interested in guns and, all this kind of like war and tactical gear, but this can be a huge warning sign, especially when you're identifying them going through these phases and steps. Now, there's also the last step before the attack is like a probing and breaching. This is when somebody might be carrying out a dry run. Maybe somebody wants to know, are they able to get something, like a weapon or something that's metal into the school? If there is some type of security system, how can they go around it? How can they get through it? And, you know, that's obviously when somebody's in that last moments before they're actually going to carry out an attack, because that's the next step, is the attack itself. But I want to reiterate something. One of the most important parts of the pathway to violence is the fact that de-escalation, right? Getting somebody off this pathway is always possible. It is always possible to get somebody off the pathway to violence. It is always possible to stop somebody. It is always possible to prevent them from carrying out an attack. And if you yourself are thinking about doing something like this, it is always possible. It's never too late. You don't have to be like me. You don't have to be like I was when I was sitting there in the bathroom and I wanted to leave and I thought that I was at the point of no return. There is no point of no return. You can stop yourself at any moment. You can call out for help at any moment. And I'll just say right now, you can call or text 988 here in the United States. It is the suicide hotline. There are people that you can call and talk to, or if you want, just text 24/7. Please be mindful of that. But I want to talk about how we as family, friends, teachers, law enforcement, anybody who wants to help get somebody off this pathway to violence, how can they do it? Well, one of the biggest things is hope. When we give somebody hope, That is how we can get them off the pathway to violence. That is how we can get them so that they don't want to hurt themselves or anybody else. Because think about it, when somebody is suicidal or even homicidal, it's because they don't have any hope in that moment. They do not believe in a better future for themselves. They believe that this is the only way, that this is the best way to stop their pain or to get the revenge that they need because their life has no meaning or purpose. They have no hope. They want to hurt themselves or others because they do not believe in a better future. So if we can help them believe in a better future, that is how we can help them so that they never do anything to hurt themselves or others, so that they can have that better future. And we also have to look beneath the threat, right? And I'm going to share with you something I learned at a presentation by a man named Matt Talbot. And he was an incredible speaker at one of the conferences I was at. And he's given me permission to kind of talk about one of his slides because he talks about looking beneath the threat, looking beneath what somebody is saying when they say, fuck you, when they say, I hate you, when they say, I hate everyone, when they say, I want to kill myself or I want to kill somebody else. You have to look at what they're saying underneath the threat. What's behind the threat? What is the motive for them saying this? When they are saying it out loud to other people, they are asking for help. They are saying, I don't know what to do with what's going on in my life right now, or I'm giving up. I just can't take it anymore. I'm in too much pain. I don't like what somebody else is saying or doing. I feel disrespected. I feel belittled. I feel ignored. I feel like nobody is listening to me. I feel like nobody is understanding me. That's what's beneath the threat. That's what is motivating the threat. And if we can work in that, if we can help somebody with those underlying emotions, with those underlying thoughts and beliefs, that is how we help them off the pathway to violence. That is how we help them, get rid of the darkness and start to have hope, start to see the light, start to believe in a better future, is by working with those underlying emotions. And we can do that with motivational interviewing. Now, I learned about motivational interviewing actually while I was in prison, and I was going through all this therapy that I would eventually give into, because I did not turn my life around right away in prison. I'm not going to lie to you. But eventually I would get into, I would embrace therapy. I would start opening up. I would be reading books. My family, my friends, community members would be sending me books and helping me out. And one thing that I learned about was motivational interviewing. And later, as I came home and I was speaking at these conferences, I learned that this is what a lot of law enforcement and mental health specialists love to use, especially with somebody in crisis, especially when somebody is struggling, is motivational interviewing. Now, motivational interviewing, I'm not an expert on it, but it is a lot about going into a conversation with an open mind, an open heart, and using open-ended questions with somebody, right? You're not coming at them with questions that are close-ended where they can just say yes or no. This is where you are allowing them to basically whatever their answer is, they are in control of the conversation. You are not in control. You are simply just asking questions and allowing them to guide you along the way with their answers. And you want to affirm them that they're doing good by opening up, that they're talking with you. And you want to let them know that you understand what they're saying, but you're doing so with active listening. You're listening to them in the moment, not thinking about your response. You're simply listening to them. You're not interrupting them with a similar story or to tell them that it's okay. You are listening to them. And when the moment is right, that's when you tell them that, well, what you're saying is X, Y, and Z, so that they know that you understand. But I also tell people, avoid loaded language when you're talking with somebody, especially when they're in crisis, because when you are especially in a disturbed state or you're really struggling and somebody comes at you and they're asking you, things about, do you have any thoughts of killing yourself or hurting anybody else? a lot of people know that if they say yes, there is a very real consequence of being institutionalized that they want to avoid. And that's why when people hear this loaded language, or even if you're just asking them about, do they have any fantasies about doing anything, why are they so angry? Because some people don't want to admit that they're angry. So when they hear somebody else ask them about being angry, they get defensive, they shut down, they put up that wall, and they're not going to be open, honest, and vulnerable with you. One of the ways that you can get somebody to be more open, honest, and vulnerable with you is by opening up to them as well. We expect it to be a one-way street where this person, where this child, teenager, adult, whoever, is just going to open up to you as you ask them questions. No, especially with kids, especially with the younger people, we as adults have to open up to them. We have to let them know that we went through similar things when we were their age, that we experienced similar thoughts, feelings, emotions. We experienced some of the same even there's people who get caught up with drugs or abusive relationships or lying, stealing, whatever. Let them know that they are not alone, that there are plenty of adults who have done what they have done and it did not define them, nor did it ruin them. You can let them know about your own experiences or another adult in their life who they look up to and they respect to. Have that person open up to them. Have that person share with them some of their childhood experiences and what they overcame and how they overcame it. And trust me, as I've opened up and shared my story with so many people, I've had so many people open up and share their story with me, because it's not a one-way street. It's a two-way street. And the more that we open up to others, especially these kids, we can lead by example and letting them know we were not perfect as kids. We did not just simply glide through life without problems. We experienced hardships and we overcame it. And I can't even say we, because I didn't overcome mine. Yeah. But so I know I've been talking a lot. There's just a few more things I want to share with you. Now, there's also, when you're dealing with somebody's underlying issues, when they're making threats about hurting themselves or others, or when you just know that they're struggling and maybe you're opening up to them, maybe you're using the motivational interviewing techniques to really help them so that they can get their own answers and that they can get some of their own advice that they'll be more likely to follow through than if you just simply told them some advice or guidance. But it's also important to now build up some healthier mentalities and give them some better coping strategies and helping them be more assertive. Now, assertiveness gets a bad rap. Some people confuse assertiveness with aggressiveness. It is not. Assertiveness is all about sharing your own thoughts, feelings, emotions, expressing yourself, speaking up, but doing so in a respectful manner, right? And being able to, compromise and connect with the people that you're speaking with. I think it's very important to teach people, especially kids, how to assert themselves, how to establish boundaries, how to say no, how to not feel guilty when they say no, how to not feel guilty, and this is the big one, how to not feel guilty when they fail, how to not feel like their life is ruined when they don't achieve a goal that they had set their mind to. We need to teach people how to fail and to do so in a good way, because we all fail. We all try things that don't work out, but it's all about how do you overcome that? What do you learn from your experience and what do you apply to yourself in the future? That's one of the huge things, that the more that we work on it and the less pressure that we're constantly putting on people, especially kids, the less pressure, the less likely they are to explode or implode. Because again, I know I've been talking quite a lot about all this stuff, and a lot of people might be thinking that this only applies to, somebody who might be on the pathway to violence, to commit a school shooting or something as horrible as that. But these techniques right here, this can help somebody who's just struggling, period. Somebody who's suffering in silence and might only turn to wanting to hurt themselves, to kill themselves, or maybe to use drugs and alcohol to numb these feelings and emotions that they don't know how to work with. Because one of the other things that I think would be a great, national way to prevent a lot of these tragedies is having emotional intelligence being included in school curriculum. Not turning schools into, a giant therapy center, but we need to be teaching kids, not just in preschool and kindergarten, but kindergarten through 12th grade. We should be teaching kids how to identify their emotions, how to cope with their emotions, how to communicate their emotions, and also how to receive other people's emotions. Because the more that we do that, the less likely it is that students will allow negative and difficult emotions to build up, to fester, to eat away at them, and to eventually implode or explode. So I think that would be wonderful if we can be doing that. And I know that there's a lot of programming out there. I've had the wonderful experience, of having Scarlett Lewis reach out to me. And for those who don't know, Scarlett Lewis lost her 6-year-old son, Jesse Lewis, in Sandy Hook Elementary School. And, after that terrible tragedy, she would go on to start up the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement, where she believes that we can help these kids. And she does exactly that, where she has curriculum that everybody can use, whether it's not only preschool, but daycares, and not only schools, but any type of institution can bring this up for adults. And whether it's, religious centers, prisons, everybody can benefit from this. Yeah, because I've also spoken with some parents who have kids that are going to these schools where the kids are being taught this, and the kids are coming home and talking to their parents about these coping mechanisms and all these things, and the parents are like, oh my God, I'm 40 years old. How am I learning this from my 10-year-old? And I think that's wonderful, because I think that we can help prevent so many tragedies. And there's so many great and wonderful people who are fighting hard to make this happen. And again, I can't undo what I've done. I can never make up for it. There's no balancing the scales. There's no redemption. That's not what this is about. I don't charge money when I go to conferences. I don't charge money when I speak on podcasts. I'm on social media, but any money that I've made on there talking about the shooting, I donate it to the homeless shelter I used to work at, or I've even, helped out some of my old classmates who are friends of mine now. We all have a purpose in life. And when we're able to help people find their purpose, to give them meaning, to give them hope, that is how we can prevent so many tragedies. Not just these school shootings, but the countless suicides, and even just the gun violence that happens on the street. Think about it. When somebody's out there living that life, it's because they don't have hope for a better life. They don't have a sense of meaning and purpose that's in a healthier way. There's no justifying what I or others do, but there's definitely a lot of ways that we can help people. And I think that the more that we're able to connect with one another, the more that we're able to see and understand one another, the more that we're able to be open, honest, and vulnerable. That's how we can get so much done in this world. And although it's an uphill battle, I believe we can make it happen. I believe we can end school shootings. Thank you. I want to address real quick the fact that after I was arrested, I would go on to sign a confession. I did not write it. Basically, the police were pissed off at me. They had roughed me up a bit in the school. I don't care. I was hoping for them to kill me. Um, but when I got to the station, they basically isolated me with one officer after telling me, you need to waive your Miranda rights. Everybody's going to be saying all types of things about you. This is your time. We are going to get your story out there for you. I was not allowed to call my family. I was not allowed to call an attorney. I was just told, waive your Miranda rights. This is your best option. And yeah, at 16 years old, New York is one of the only states that would allow me to do so without ever talking to anybody. So yeah, I started answering questions from police. They were obviously very pissed off. They made sure to isolate me with one officer. There was no audio recordings, no video recordings, and he would be writing down all these things as if I was, and he would be adding in a lot of things that I did not say. But he would be, quote unquote, reading to me the statement while negating to read out certain parts. And sure enough, after a while, this one other officer comes in and says, hey, he has an attorney. We just got a phone call. Everything needs to stop. And so the officer who was interrogating me basically said, all right, we got to wrap this up. We've been good to you. We need to get you into one of these cells. Sign here, initial there, sign there, all that stuff. And I never read that statement. And I would go on to hear from law enforcement that this, unfortunately, is a very common tactic. Um, Officers want to try to make sure to get as much evidence as possible to put somebody that they believe did something horrible away for as long as possible. So yeah. And then I would go on to plead guilty to 3 counts of attempted murder. And people say, well, if you didn't plan on shooting or killing anybody, why plead guilty? Why say all these things in court saying that you are guilty of these things? I was facing 75 years. Not gonna lie, they tried to get me to plead guilty to 45 years, then like 35, 30, 25, 20, there was a whole bunch of offers. And then finally, when we got to, 20, I was like, you know what, a trial would just put everybody through this, re-traumatizing everybody. It would be a media circus. I wouldn't even have a jury of my peers. It would be a jury of my peers' parents and grandparents, because me and my peers were too young to be on a jury. So yeah, and I just didn't have the fight in me. Like, for anybody, this might sound crazy, but as depressed as I was, I just felt like I wanted to go home, obviously, but I just didn't have any fight in me. So yeah.